Alright, we're back with our continuing discussions regarding our training in self-defense shooting, since most of us are concealed carriers, home defenders, and maybe even some cops. So far we've seen how deeply competitive type shooting techniques have been embedded into defensive shooting techniques and the dangers that this can bring with it. Now, while I've always recognized the fact, and I've said it before, that many competitive shooting techniques can be crossed over and used in some defensive shooting situations and without harm. But I stand firm in my knowledge, not my opinion, but my knowledge, that some of those competitive techniques can indeed cause harm in a defensive situation, or at the very least it can present an ongoing dangerous risk to the defender and or the public alike. Again, this is not theory. Evidence does exist to confirm this. I wouldn't say it if I didn't have the evidence. Now, I'm not trying to cast a bad light on competitive shooting. It's a great sport with great people, very disciplined people. And I had a great time for the 13 years or so that I competed, except, I stuck with matches that were strictly based in real life defensive scenarios and designed to be shot with your EDC, right? Not the speed matches or the matches that were not relevant to real world situations and shot with those expensive custom competition grade guns. I never cared anything about that sort of thing. That's playing games. All right. In my videos, I'm only concerned with pointing out what I know to be techniques or methods that should not be practiced by concealed carriers, home defenders, and cops. Unfortunately, this happens to be most competitive techniques. Now, these very same competitive techniques are taught all over America by nearly every single instructor to concealed carriers and other defensive shooters. This is improper training. All right, it's improper teaching, because we have an entire generation now that is completely ill-prepared for a deadly force shooting situation because of this negligent training. It appears that students and instructors alike don't understand that there is a difference between the various shooting disciplines, and if they do understand that, then they obviously don't know that some of those techniques cannot be crossed over from one discipline to another. They believe that they're all the same, or that none of that matters anyway. Well, that shows an incredible lack of basic understanding of any shooting discipline. It shows a lack of logic and common sense, and it highlights their obvious inexperience in deadly force situations. Now, let me just give you an example of some of the videos I've been watching lately. I'm going to talk about trigger prepping. Not sure if you're familiar with that, so I'll go over it. All right, trigger prepping. As you're extending out, trigger prepping involves slightly taking the slack up out of that trigger. Actually pulling that trigger back as you're extending out. And hopefully, they say, if your timing is right, the shot will break as soon as your front sight lands on that target. That's trigger prepping. You're actually pulling that trigger back as you're getting your sights on and extending out, okay? Now, why do that? Well, according to the guy in the video that was teaching it, by doing that, he was able to shave off almost 1/8 of a second from his draw to his first shot time. Seriously, 1/8 of a second. I just watched it. This is exactly the shit that I'm talking about right here. These popular gurus teaching defensive students, and that's what he was teaching, defensive students, this kind of horse shit. Listen, if you're a concealed carrier, a home defender, or a cop, just don't do that trigger prepping. Don't do it. That's a damn good way to cause a negligent discharge and a damn good way to hit an innocent bystander or accidentally shoot your suspect unjustifiably so. Okay? Again, this is competitive shooter techniques. It's fine for competition. If you pull that trigger back too soon before you land on target, well, hell, the worst that can happen is you'll hit another target out there. Well, that's all right. It's just paper or cardboard. But in real life, it's other people. It's kids. It's women. It's our neighbors. It could be your family member. It could be one of your cops. Look, use common sense. Just don't start pulling that trigger back at all until you are on target. Capiche? On target. Because it only, when you're on target, because it only takes that long to do it. I mean, how long is that? That extra 1/8 of a second is not going to save your life. It's not going to matter. Now, let me explain why this practice is dangerous. In a deadly force situation, trust me, I know this, your heart is trying to beat right out of your chest. And buddy, you feel like it too. Your blood pressure is sky high. Blood leaves your extremities, your hands, your fingers, your feet, and all that, in order to gorge your vital organs as a survival mechanism. Now that's called vasoconstriction. This can cause a measure of numbness in your fingertips to the point that you're unable to realize how much pressure you're putting on that trigger face. All right? That's what causes negligent discharges in self-defense or, deadly force scenarios. This is exactly why so many cops have accidentally shot a suspect while holding him at gunpoint, or have shot innocent bystanders and other cops, fellow cops. And that's why cops are now trained, at least when I was in it, to stay off of that trigger until on target. Do you want to take the risk of accidentally shooting someone in order to save 1/8 of a second in time? Of course not. It's ridiculous. It's retarded. So stay off of the trigger. All right. Reloads. I mean, just your typical magazine reloads. You're empty. You're locked back. You're dry. Got to get another mag in there. Why is it impossible? Obviously, impossible for anybody to move when reloading. The worst thing you can do in an active deadly force situation is to stand still out in the open to reload an empty gun or to clear a malfunction. Yet this is exactly what we see in every single YouTube training video. Listen, I know that you're fast on the reload. Okay, because I know you've been training for a long time and you have that skill mastered. And it's important. Okay? You'll probably never need it and you'll probably never use it, but it's important to have because it has happened and it can happen. So continue to practice. But you've only done that on the range, which is a controlled environment. It's a completely different animal out in the real world, the real life deadly force situation in an uncontrolled environment. In a real life scenario, your reloads will be nowhere near the same speed or with the same smoothness. You will fumble a little bit. It's natural. There's nothing you can do about that. Your practices will greatly help that. It'll minimize that, but it'll still happen. Don't fool yourself into thinking that your precision, your speed, your smoothness on the range will magically be duplicated on the streets in a deadly force encounter. It's never worked out that way. If you are in such a situation that would require you to reload, which is extremely rare, or to clear a malfunction, then do it behind cover when possible. Okay, that's why heading for cover should be always your number one priority. Jar your weapon and head for cover. All right, and do your magazine changes or clear that malfunction from behind cover, so you don't give your suspect, your attacker, a big clear target standing still waiting on him to shoot or stab. All right. And finally, teaching competitive grip technique. Now I'm putting this out here to make a point, although I already have a video out speaking in detail about this poor grip technique. And they're still teaching it, obviously. The example I'm going to use today here is from I guess a fairly popular YouTube channel, the host of which claims that he's been in virtually every special forces unit in the history of the military, which I don't know, he might have. But he doesn't look any older than 35. But, again, I'm not cracking on him. Anyways, this guy is teaching a class, and after he goes into great detail of exactly how you should stand for your deadly force encounter, which of course is the same old please kill me isosceles stance, which is no big surprise there, he then goes on to demonstrate, and I'm going to use his words, this is his quote, the only acceptable way to ever grip a handgun. Well, that should tell you something right there. All right. And once again, it's the same old tired freaking thumbs forward, get my thumbs all over the slide and all over the controls, and break my wrist down like that for whatever reason. And using what he refers to as a clamshell squeeze on the grip panels here. And I've talked about this before too. He's talking about, pushing out. As you push out, you're doing that clamshell grip, that vice grip, locking it in, vicing it. Okay, right? Again, it comes from applying pressure, firm pressure to the front and the back straps, not the sides of it, because recoil and muzzle rise go up. They don't go side to side. They go up and back. All right. Now he gives himself away in this very next statement to the students when he says, I challenge you to find any world champion shooter that does not use this very technique. Champion shooter. By that you mean competitive shooter, right? Why would he say that? Well, it's because he obviously believes that teaching competitive techniques to defensive shooters is okay, which is a dead giveaway in my way of thinking that he really has no concept of self-defense shooting or personal deadly force encounters. Instead, I'd like to challenge him to find any legendary lawman that, has survived multiple gunfights, such as Jim Cirillo, Bob Stash, Fairbairn and Sykes, Masada Yu, Bill Allard, and others, that has ever used his technique. Well, I'll save him the research. None of them have ever used any such stance or grip method. Even world IPSC champion Ross Seifert never used it. never used that grip. Yet they continue to push it like brainwashed followers. All right. To wrap it up, my message here is not to trash talk competitive shooting. It's only intended to point out that many of the practice methods and shooting techniques, including those I have mentioned, used by competitive shooters, should not be introduced to or taught to any student of defensive shooting. There are much better techniques available. If your defensive instructor, shooting instructor, teaches you these competitive techniques, well, then you've got an incompetent instructor, plain and simple. You have the power to change that. Listen, surviving a deadly force encounter is not a game. It's not a sport. So don't practice techniques used in sports or games. Practice only true, real-life encounters that have a proven history of working very well. All right, thanks for your time, boys. I hope you're getting something out of these videos. My goal is to get you better prepared for winning a deadly force encounter. And sometimes it does mean going hard against some current and popular teachings that have, for whatever reasons, done away with facts, reality, and proven history. Well, I'm here to restore that. So, I'm Antonius, and I'll be shooting it straight again forthwith. Ciao.